All right, welcome back to another episode of Wise Words. This week, we're still talking about habits. We're going to be talking about The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, which is less to do with the mechanisms that underpin habits and more to do with procrastination, which I guess is
specifically overcoming procrastination. I guess you could also say procrastination is one of the main reasons we sort of, I guess, don't act on habits. So it's one of those sort of like barriers to doing things, and therefore it's important.
Well, I don't think like procrastination has to do with like work necessarily. It can do with kind of any kind of task at the end of the day.
You can procrastinate to not go to the gym. You can procrastinate not to do, any of the habits that you think that you want to sort of ingrain into your life. So therefore it's obviously something that needs to be known about, overcome, etc. And this book provides the ways to think about what procrastination is, as well as some sort of tips, tools, and tricks to overcome it.
Absolutely. And I think I don't know if I've ever really read around procrastination, to be honest. Like, I think I've read little bits here and there, but I don't think I've ever read a book about it. But it was just interesting kind of, breaking it down and seeing how, our attitudes towards tasks or doing tasks or sticking with them and create certain feelings, whether that's anxiety, boredom, feeling of being overwhelmed. And then we deal with that by not actually tackling the task, but procrastinating. And then it's not until we basically get to a point where we feel like we're forced or we have to do something that we actually follow through with it. But it was just interesting. And that's basically his whole take on this whole book, is like understanding our attitude towards work and then how we procrastinate, like the corresponding ways that we procrastinate, and then how we can solve that. And he gives some tips and tricks, like I said. So
am I right to think as well he was he is a practitioner, isn't he? He's like a psychiatrist in terms of he helps people overcome procrastination. Like, that's his day job.
I think so. And I think he used to be in the army as well, which probably says a lot about like habits in general. And I guess the way to view this book, because like we're saying, it's a lot to do with procrastination, but the idea that we create the habit of procrastinating by, we have this feeling, we don't want to deal with it, so we procrastinate. We come up with some behavior, which is like putting it off, and that becomes a habit. So every time, like, I get an essay, I don't want to do the essay, I get a bit anxious, and then I do something else. I go and play.
You do something that might, relieve the anxiety, or something that takes your mind away from the anxiety, which is, it can be anything from, like you just said, playing PlayStation to, just even checking your phone mindlessly. That's a very common one at the moment, where it's like, yes, you're right. You're feeling this anxiety, feeling this. You're basically, you're feeling pain to some degree, and therefore you try and escape it through, any mechanism that can help you. And obviously, anything which involves sort of dopamine is going to help, and therefore, your phone, etc., is going to be one of the first port of calls for you to head towards.
No, exactly. Precisely. So should we?
Let's just jump straight into the notes then. So,
all right.
You got the foreword. So we tend to engage in procrastination when we have anxiety about starting a task, or if they are boring, overwhelming. The idea is to lower the hurdles to engage in the task. And that's pretty much exactly what we just said. I thought the starting a task quite interesting as well, because it's that idea that, a task is always seems much bigger than it is when you haven't started it. But with the moment you kind of start doing something, you realize maybe the task isn't quite as sort of damning or scary as it is. Such as what you're saying there about writing an essay. Like, you don't write an essay, I guess you sort of write it by paragraph, and just thinking of the whole essay in total is, overwhelming and scary. But once you start actually doing the work towards it, it becomes less scary because you have a more clear idea of what you need to do it. But when it sits there just as like an overwhelming, like, this is what has to be done in the future, and you don't know too much about it, it can be like that sort of, the classic Jordan Peterson quote, scary monster that you haven't sort of checked out yet, right? It's more scary because it's unknown. You don't really know what you're doing, etc.
Exactly. And like a prime example, and I was literally thinking about this today, is me getting around to uploading book summaries. I used to just have like this vague idea of what I would do, but I didn't really have it like set out in a plan. And now I just have like a template on Notion where I can like, even to like click on this, click on that, type in this, like even if it's that simple, it's just broken down. It's so
you
much
need the
easier
structure, right? And then yes, I've actually something similar to that. I found the same with I created that question journal, like the questions you should ask yourself for specific reasons. I've tried to do it to break it down with certain aspects where, like, if I'm feeling like this, I have a checklist of questions I should go through and just do it. And just having it there obviously helps you because you just have the structure. You just follow it one by one. Like, this question, I answer it. This question, I answer it. And the task is less scary because it's literally all in front of me. It's like I don't have to think of what to do. It's like I know what to do because it's right in front of me. Is this question here, answer it. This question here, I answer it. Whereas a lot of things, especially with like, I don't know, like we said, like essays, for example, they tend to be way more broad. It's kind of like, here's a question. There's like a million different ways to answer it. So you're a bit like, oh my God, like how do I do this? But if you have like a structure, so like that's, I guess this is why universities as well, they give you that sort of standard structure, like introduction, first point, second point, a third point, summary. At least that helps. Because then when you have a bit of a structure there, you can start writing. Like you actually just start by, this is the point I want to make. This is the other point I want to make. This is the other point I want to make. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I can start writing about these points, even if it's absolute gibberish. At least I've got something now I can start doing. Whereas when it's just like an open-ended question of like, this is a point, you're like, oh my God, what is the point?
No, exactly. And I think you kind of want to, realistically, with most tasks, if they involve a level of quality that is needed, rather than it's just something that just needs to be tick and done, you want to be able to conserve your energy so that you reap the most of the rewards. So if you go through and you make your plan for your essay, for example, okay, you might need to put in a lot of work in the first bit, okay? But once you've got it all laid out, then it's pretty straightforward to follow. And the same thing is like when it comes to actually like coming up with ideas where you've got everything there already. And so you don't need to worry about all of that stuff. Now you can focus on the stuff where having like that energy, your cognitive energy, it can actually help you and it can get you, make you reap the rewards. Now I think most of this book, it's quite like kind of practical. So there's a lot of like lists that we'll probably read out just about, how to, because it's like 5 steps to this or 3 steps to that. So it might sound like we're reading a lot, but we'll probably like talk about it afterwards and give our own opinion. But just a word of warning.
Just a heads up.
So let's start off. So the introduction. So the procrastination habit cycle. So it starts by getting overwhelmed and then we feel pressured. There's a fear of failure. So you try harder, work longer, and then you start to feel resentful and you lose motivation and then procrastinate. So if you don't deal with procrastination, it can become part of your identity, just like any habit. Like I said earlier on, like you're literally creating that habit of dealing with something in a procrastinating way. And it becomes automated and subconscious, and therefore, I am a procrastinator. How many times have we heard people say that? So redefining procrastination. So procrastination is not the cause of our problems with accomplishing tasks. It is an attempt to resolve a variety of underlying issues, including low self-esteem, perfectionism, fear of failure and of success, indecisiveness, an imbalance between work and play, ineffective goal setting, and negative concepts about work and yourself. And I think,
I think everybody suffers from like a mix.
Absolutely.
I kind of look at that list and I think, there's some elements of tasks that I procrastinate on, which are less about, fear of failure and perfectionism and more just about, indecisiveness because, having to make a decision is hard. And therefore, if you don't make the decision now, a bit like what we were saying about habits in general, if you don't decide on what habits to do, how can you even bloody start doing any habits because you haven't decided? And that's one of the first steps to take, or like deciding on going to this gym, for example, to follow through with a habit. So I think, for some things I procrastinate on, for example, that would be a big one. But then there's other times, where it can be as well ineffective goal setting, or, even perfectionism does come into it a little bit. Like I said to you just before this podcast, I want the perfect habit tracking system, but unfortunately it doesn't exist. And I'm trying to build something which also is like perfectionism, and that extent is in the eyes of the beholder. Like, what do I want it to do for me? But because of that, recently, I've just not even bothered trying because I'm like, well, I can't build it. But now it's just like I'm just tinkering around. But that's what I mean when it's, is a list that we're not just one or the other with this list. It's like we can be different elements of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, they kind of come from the nature of the task, right? Like one might be, quite vague. And so, it's a bit overwhelming because we don't know what to do. But then others might be really simple, but really boring. And we'd much prefer to be doing something that's like some leisure activity or something that actually elicits fun. So I think, they basically, depending on the nature of the task, it kind of elicits these different, things within us, whether it's perfectionism or indecisiveness or fear of failure. I think it definitely, depends on the nature of the task. So the new definition that he puts forward is procrastination is a mechanism for coping with the anxiety associated with starting or completing any task or decision. The Now Habit program proposes 10 powerful tools for overcoming procrastination, and he kind of touches on these throughout the book. I've got to say, not in the most structured way, but yes, nonetheless. So number 1, creating safety. So lessen your fear of failure and learn how to bounce back from mistakes with renewed purpose. Number 2, reprogramming negative attitudes through positive self-talk. I thought that one was particularly impactful. I hadn't really thought about that one. We'll touch on all of these. Using the symptom to trigger the cure. How to use old habits to evoke and strengthen the formation of new positive habits. Number 4, guilt-free play will teach you how to strategically schedule your leisure time. 5, 3-dimensional thinking and the reverse calendar. 6, making worry work for you. 7, coping with distractions. 8, the Unschedule. 9, setting realistic goals. 10, working the flow state. And there's an extra one here saying controlled setbacks. What do you think of all the points that he put forward throughout this book?
Well, in terms of these sort of tools and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of them I kind of heard before, but then there's a few things I thought he took quite like a novel sort of approach on. Like, I also didn't really quite like how he called like his like reverse calendar and like 3-dimensional thinking. It was a bit. I was like, I don't know what you could call it. I swear I've seen it before called something else, and it's kind of like he's trying to trademark it himself. I took the most to want out of like setting realistic goals. I thought that was quite interesting. I think because when reading this, you kind of pick out the stuff that obviously maybe relates to you the most.
Yeah.
I think, for example, a lot of my sort of procrastination comes around with not setting realistic goals, and then because of that, ruminating and getting down based upon the fact that I've set goals which are just unattainable in the first place, right? It's like when we talked about habits, it's best to start off with 4, but I would try and start with like 20. And then I'd miss like 10 of them. I'd be like, crap, why have I missed like 10 of them? This is I'm a failure. But the reality is, like, if you should just start smaller, right? But we know this. What else? The positive self-talk, I thought that was relatively quite interesting as well, in terms of like, changing your mindset from like, I have to do this to I should, or like I choose. I have to do this to I choose to do this. And I thought that was interesting. Although I've tried many times to, like, when I'm doing, like a tax return, to be like, I'm choosing to do this. Like, actually, no, the government's making me do this. So there is like elements of it where I don't choose, but I've tried it, and it kind of works. It kind of works. It's definitely like, this, or maybe the better way is putting it, it should be like, this is the person I want to be, and this person would choose to do this because this person, gets stuff done, whatever. In that sense. What did you pick out? What was the sort of the main tools for you then?
I would say the language aspect of the self-talk. I've come across bits like that, but how feasible it is to actually implement, I don't know, because obviously you have to catch yourself every time you see yourself saying, I have to do this. What else? The Unschedule I've come across before. But I did try to implement it, but I do have, like, constantly find, and we'll talk about this later, obviously, but this idea of like not scheduling work, I have done that and I find it quite difficult. I do like something being in a specific time and giving it a time.
But I thought part of the stick with this was more you schedule in the play and then the work fills around it, right? So like the whole point was you schedule in the play to then work before to like work towards the play. Yeah. If I remember part of it correctly, it was that, wasn't it?
So it's exactly that. The idea that you're scheduling the play and then around it you can fit in work, so it doesn't make you feel guilty. But I found that, like, let's say I've got a bunch of tasks, and maybe this is me being not like realistic because I've got too many tasks to do. But then it means like, well, first of all, I have to juggle which one I'm going to do. There has to be a priority list. It's fine if you've got like one job and you know what to do, but if you've got multiple things, then it's like, do I do this one here and do this one here? Like, how do I fit them in? And this whole like kind of juggling so many decisions just makes me like procrastinate about doing it. And then I just go and do the fun stuff that I booked in anyway. So
no, I completely get that.
Yeah.
That's the nature of having like too many things on your plate, right? Too many different things you can do, and then that's when the indecisiveness procrastination comes in. I find that one's a big thing for me as well, because there's always about, like, especially with the stuff we do, it's technically it's never ending project. Like, there could be millions of things we could do. Like, I have, loads of book summaries I could go back through, progressively summarize, re-upload, change to Notion, right? We got so many things we could be doing and every day, and if we don't have a schedule for that, it becomes very hard to do anything, right? Because you end up spending the time you're meant to be working just trying to decide what to do, and then by the time you've decided what to do, you're already tired from all the effort you spend trying to figure out what to do. And then like you said, it's playtime. You're like, then you feel shit because you've got to the point of playtime and you're like, but I haven't actually achieved anything. I've only just decided now what I need to do. And I think that, to honest, that probably affects most of us. And I think it's also a reason why lots of people really struggle with replying to people these days. Like, I struggle to reply to people quite badly, quite chronically. Like, somebody send me a message, I'll be like, okay, right, I can't reply to this now, I'll reply to this later. And if it just goes,
For me, it's the only area where I think I implement this. I choose not to talk to this person right now. Most of the time I'm like, I have to do this. And then here it's like, nope, I'm not going to reply to this until later on. Otherwise I just can't keep up. Too many texts.
This just I think this is the very chronic problem of this current day and age as well. And I think it's also chronic with the fact that there's so much information, so many things you could be interested in. So like I guess this definitely impacts people like us too, and I guess anybody listening to this is curious enough to like want to know more. People like us, I feel, because you're so curious in everything, you're always just like, there's always so much more to do, so much more to learn, so much more things, like, and there's not enough time in the day. And then you get tired of trying to think about how to do, like, what should I be doing now? Like, I should be learning this, I should be doing this. Like, I've got a list of like 50 different skills I want to learn, and it's like, how do I find time for this? And then you get upset because you're like, I can't, you just can't fit it in. Do you get what I mean? And then it's just, I think we could all do a bit of like, slow down. We're not like, time goes quickly, but at the same time, there is time. You just got to focus on a few small things in one go. You can't, like, it's a bit like the habits. You can't do 20, just do 2, 3, then move on. But
so, on that, should we move on?
Yes. So we've got why we procrastinate. So your strategic program begins with identifying your procrastination patterns, so you can apply the appropriate techniques for replacing them. And these are the 6 warning signs to look out for, or to ask yourself.
I think so. Just read the ones in blue.
Yeah, just to read the ones in blue. So the first question is, does life feel like a long series of obligations that cannot be met? I'm going to read 2 or 3 off the ones below. So like an example of this would be, do you keep an impossibly long to-do list, or do you feel powerless with no sense of choice? The second question is, are you unrealistic about time? So do you talk about starting projects in vague terms, such as sometimes, next week, or in the fall? Or do you lose track of how you spend your time? I guess we're all pretty guilty of that. Number 3, are you vague about your goals and values? So do you find it difficult to stay committed to any one person or project? Have difficulty knowing what you really want for yourself, but are clear about what you should want? Number 4, are you unfulfilled, frustrated, depressed? So do you have life goals that you've never completed or even attempted? Fear that you're always going to be a procrastinator? Number 5 is, are you indecisive and afraid of being criticized for making a mistake? So do you delay completing projects because you try to make them perfect? Fear taking responsibility for decisions because you're afraid of being blamed if something goes wrong? And the very last question is, are low self-esteem and lack of assertiveness holding you back from becoming productive? So do you blame outside events for your failures because you're afraid to admit any deficiencies, or believe you are what you do rather than, or you are your net worth? I think this is quite interesting sort of diagnosis in the sense that, like, I definitely see myself more of some of those than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then that's the whole point here of doing this exercise, to kind of realize what your procrastination sort of buttons are, like
where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. What are the reasons you are procrastinating?
Yeah.
And obviously, once you know why you are procrastinating, or like the rough areas of why, or the rough reasons for why you're procrastinating, then at least you can come up with a strategy to sort of combat this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and once again, like you were saying earlier, you can be a mix of these. I think I relate to a bunch of them. Luckily, I think I have a system that holds some of them accountable, but others I'm just, they're like, yeah, I completely agree with this. And I think they are very common amongst most people, and they do kind of, I would say, tap into why most people procrastinate.
I mean, it's they're relatively broad enough, like questions, right? Like, because for example, it almost reveals certain areas of your life. So one of the ones here I was just reading, which is, are you vague about your goals and values, right? There could be some goals in your life that you're really clear on, and therefore you don't procrastinate, right? Like, so if somebody, let's just say, is happily always going to the gym, always keeping healthy, they've probably got a very clear goal and value system which directs them. But then they might not be clear on their goals and tasks related to their like work life, and they might procrastinate all the time. So just because you have your goals clear and stuff in one area doesn't mean you don't have them clear in another area. So it's worth thinking about the things you're procrastinating on and what are the reasons for it.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because you do see those people who are like really committed to career, but then they can't apply the same rules to other areas of their life.
Of course. Yeah.
And I wonder if an element of that is the metrics put in place that allow you to see like progress and things like that. So for instance, if you're going to the gym, a lot of the time it's quite easy to measure progress in the sense that you're running faster, you're running further, you're lifting more weight, those kinds of things. Whereas like, I wonder if other areas like improve at relationships with family or something like that, there's no kind of like metric in a sense there to follow. And so there's a bit less of a guide. And so it requires you to come up with more, ways of improving and measuring and stuff like that.
No, I think you're probably correct there in that sense. And also with work life, let's just say, and you're an employee, you might not be that motivated because you don't really set the tasks that you get set. You just get set them, and you don't want to do them because you don't really feel any sort of like they fit your value system. You're not clear where you're going in that role. It's quite easy to then become a procrastinator at work because you're like, well, I don't see the point. I'm only here for my paycheck, and that's it. So there's lots of areas where this sort of can kick in.
No, absolutely. So I think it's just important to be mindful of these kind of 6 categories, so that then you can, once you understand why you procrastinate, then you can start to tackle it. And
it's worth anybody who's listening, you can go on the website. Probably, is it up on the website now or not?
Yeah.
It's up on the website. Okay, so you can literally see this list on the website after the podcast, because it's probably worth copy and pasting across and answering these questions yourself to figure out exactly where it is and why you're procrastinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So we often procrastinate when we fear a threat to our sense of worth and independence. Perfectionism often occurs when we over-identify who we are with our work. I'm very guilty of that. From this fear follows the counterproductive drive towards perfectionism, severe self-criticism, and the fear that you must deprive yourself of leisure time in order to satisfy some unseen judge. Those who gain their sense of identity from many areas are more resilient when failing in any one area. I thought that was a particularly important point. Like when I remember reading this and seeing that point, is that like, if you can see that you're progressing in other areas, or that, you're worthy in other areas, then you don't just conflate, your work in one area with your self-worth. You don't mix it up. Like there's been so many times where I think when I'm like writing an essay and I'm like, fuck, I have this ideal, this fantasy of how good it's going to be. It's going to be the best essay ever. And then if I don't reach that, then, I'm failing. And then that means I'm a failure.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying, but but also at the same time, if you have other areas of your life the point being, if you have other areas of your life where you're progressing and being successful, then you're more resilient to like setbacks in one area. So like, obviously if your whole life was like built around essays, let's just say you just loved essays so much, you thought you were the best essay writer on this planet, and that's the only thing you had to your name, and then somebody shat on you and said like, that is just crap, like that's terrible, that's just soul destroying, right? So that's why it's almost really good to have sort of mini identity eggs and many identity baskets, to be like, I'm not just this one, like I'm not just good at this one domain. I'm sort of a well-rounded individual, I guess. And this is kind of where I guess people's work-life balance, gets fucked, and they only appreciate work. So they're so successful in work, but they've neglected everything else in their life. And then, if you told them that, they'd probably like attack you, because it's like, well, you just took their one thing that means anything to them.
It's interesting though, because I do find that like, let's say you do have other areas of your life that you're progressing in, then you can use that as a justification to either not do well or explain why you didn't do well. So
moral licensing almost, right? It's like back to like what we said in the last podcast with you kind of used one. I was like, it's like, I went to the gym today so I can go eat a McDonald's.
Exactly.
I deserve it. So like, it's like I get what you're saying. I do like. Yeah, I'm kind of similar in the way as well, because like, let's just say I've done the habits we're tracking every day. You do your habits, you're like, I'm successful, I've done my habits, but then you're like, but I didn't do that one task I should have done today. And then it's like, is your day a success or a failure? From the reading we've done around habits, it should technically be a success, and it is a success, but it's no reason to say like, I can slack off not doing these tasks because I've succeeded in my I've succeeded in my habits. So there is a sort of middle ground balancing act to this, I think, to be honest.
It's somehow trying to like stay neutral or like be calibrated, and not trying to inflate it or deflate it based on I don't know, your performance. I do find myself sometimes like, if I do like a shit essay and I get my grade back, I'm like, it doesn't fucking matter anyway. I wasn't interested in it. Like I'm more interested in this area. I was completing my habits. It's funny.
I mean, to be fair, you can't. But at the end of the day, as well, you can't let it like be all consuming and just like destroy you in any sense. You can't be like, well, this is. You're right. This person's right. I was like crap. Like I'm crap. At least you can be like, look, fair enough. I didn't do very well, but it was because I wasn't interested in it, and I've managed to progress in all these other areas of my life. So do you know what? Net positive.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously, there's any way you can spin it, but at the same time, you've got to, have a healthy relationship with yourself. You can't just jump in and beat yourself up too much about some profs percentage they're going to give you on an essay, which is always like ever since I saw that people could just get remarks and get up like 20%, I've kind of sort of disregarded sort of these like scores you get.
They're very abstract. So this next point I was quite interesting. So many procrastinators have a family pattern whereby praise was often withheld from them because it might go to their head. So if all a child receives is criticism or so-called constructive feedback on how it might be improved, then there is a lot of friction to engaging in tasks. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Once again, we know the kind of link to how we're brought up and our association and how habits are made. So it makes sense that, if all you ever do is get criticized every time you do a task, or you could always do better, then you're going to create this habit of procrastinating, because you never want to feel that state. It's dealing with that state.
That one makes a lot of sense as well, because it's the classic you get sort of tied into this perfectionism sort of based thing where, if all you ever do is get criticized for your work, you then have like a high caliber for like what's good work, and therefore you're always scared to put yourself out there because you're scared it's not perfect enough, right? It's kind of that sort of like external nagging that it's not good enough.
Absolutely.
Yes. And the next bit you got here, so there is one main reason why we procrastinate, and it rewards us with temporary relief from stress. It takes us away from something we view as painful or threatening. And this is kind of what we're saying very back at the beginning of this podcast. It's, procrastination, the routines you do are often to sort of, to avoid this feeling of stress, and therefore anything which can relieve you of that, whether it's, distractions through phone, or even just like, my God, what's it called when your mind just wanders? Why am I
mind wandering?
It's just mind what? Like, what's it called? Like brain
fog?
Something else, no? No, when you're daydreaming. Even like daydreaming is a form of procrastination. To a degree. It's like, you're taking your mind off, the stress of the task. Like, I really should get this done. I'm like really stressed. And you just start wondering about, the nice pizza you're going to have for dinner or something. I don't know. I'm saying that I want a pizza.
Now you
But, it's that type of thing. So here, the cycle goes as follows. So perfectionism demand leads to fear of failure. Then that leads to procrastination, which leads to self-criticism, which leads to anxiety and depression. Okay, he's getting pretty deep. Which leads to loss of confidence, which equals a greater fear of failure, which leads to stronger need to use procrastination as a temporary escape. And I'm not saying everybody falls into that sort of anxiety, depression trap, but it's very true with or at least I find it myself, where the procrastination loop is like that. So let's just say you're in a day and you've got a really important task you're going to do, and you've been procrastinating, you haven't done it. As the day goes on, you feel worse about not doing it, and therefore you procrastinate even more. It literally happens. Like the pressure of I should have done this keeps. And I find it actually really interesting. If there's a task I've known from ages ago, it's not a time-bound task, right? So it's not something you have to do very soon. It's just something fine. It's something that has to be done eventually.
Yeah.
And I know it's a big task. I know I've been putting it off. If I end up doing it, I always feel amazing afterwards. I always have such a kick for oh my God, I finally did it. Yeah. Even though I guess it is that level of because it's looming over to you, and you've assigned a lot of self-doubt and self-criticism assigned to this task. Because the more you procrastinate on a task, I guess it kind of gets built up with this energy, right? This negative energy associated with it. So when you finally do that thing that had so much of your, I guess, identity tied to it through self-criticism, when you finally do it, you're like, oh my God, what a relief.
It's a good point.
I've done it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel, at least when it's stuff that I've put off for a very long time and I finally do it. I always get into a super almost what's the word when you're really happy, but it's beyond euphoric, maybe. When Peterson talks about this, there's the dangerous type of happiness is where you become so happy that you could potentially be mugged or something. It's that level of happiness. It's not even happy. It's full on you're really you're almost delirious to a degree. It's you're being in a really good mood to everybody, and that's how I react to it. It's a bit there's something there. There's something with the procrastination self-talk loop where you criticize yourself to the point where finally doing that task relieves that sense of self-criticism. You're finally you're basically unworthy. You have this whole negative self-talk cycle until you're unworthy. You can't do this task. And you finally do it, and it's I did it.
No, I agree. Yeah, I guess you originally you say that you can do something, then you don't do it, and then you create this association that with whatever it is to that task, and then once you're able to complete it, then it's a relief. It's it's almost relief, you were right originally. You were able to do that task, and I wonder if there are tasks that relate more to ourselves or have more on the line in that regard. Like you said earlier,
I have thought the longer stuff remains in the to-do list, the more powerful it is when you finally do it. Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I have a really rough notepad of things that I jot down when I can't be bothered to put it into Notion. So if it's too quick to why would I spend the time typing out when I can just write it down, tick it off? But I find if something stays for a couple of days, obviously that's something that's telling me something. Because I don't want to do this. Whatever it is, I don't want to do it. Yeah. And I've always thought the longer it's there, the better I feel when I finish it. When I finally do it, I'm that has been there for a while and it's finally done.
You've conquered.
But there's got to be something towards there's got to be something towards the build up. I think he didn't really mention it in the book. I'm just sort of hypothesizing it. Yeah. The longer it sort of hangs over you, the better you feel when it's gone.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's a good point. So on to the next section. So how we use procrastination. So we can become addicted to the rewards of procrastination, learning to use it in three main ways. Number one, as an indirect way of resisting pressure from authorities, so external demands. Number two, as a way of lessening fear of failure by providing an excuse for a disappointing, less than perfect performance. And number three, as a defense against fear of success by keeping us from doing our best. So those are the three kind of ways that we use procrastination. Choosing to procrastinate can be a sense of plausible deniability, my favorite words. As time is wasted, there is less time to do your best work. Therefore, you cannot be judged the standards of your best work. I thought that was a good point, and I I've engaged in this too many times where it's like, oh, when you go to like school or you go to uni and you say, oh yeah, I had to do it all in one night, almost like boasting, because like, okay, let's say you haven't got the grade yet, but then it's also like telling people, well, I couldn't have done my best job anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. But I don't know whether lots of people at university do it as a way of excusing themselves, or because of the fact that they procrastinated so long that they literally had to do it in a night. But then it also conveniently is also an excuse for getting a bad mark.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't think it's a way of avoiding the bad mark personally, unless you purposely did it. But I've always thought the reason why I did it at university was because I literally couldn't bring myself to do it unless it was like a proper time pressure to get it done. Yeah. And therefore, when there was that, I had to do it last minute. But isn't it amazing that I swear to God that affects most people? Like most people who went to university, that is the way they do most of their stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's very much within the last couple of days coming up to it. I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but most people I used to hang out with, maybe that's just the bums.
No, I think most people, there are some people,
there's some people who are really organized,
like 2 weeks early, and I'm like,
there's people who do it before the term even starts. They've read all the modules and stuff in advance. Future presidents.
Bloody hell. It's funny. So fear of success involves 3 central issues. You find yourself in conflict over the awful choice between advancement and friends. Some of these I won't completely, bowled over by. Number 2, success in completing a project means facing some painful disincentives to success, which means like more responsibility, for example, looking for a new job or paying back loans. And number 3, success means advancement to increasing demands and a fear of ultimate failure sometime in the future. It is essentially a fear of delayed failure.
So these ones I personally didn't really sort of connect with. I feel like maybe somebody listening might connect with these ones more but I don't think my procrastination is a fear of failure, fear of success or anything like that. I've never ever had a fear of like trying to achieve something. I struggle to appreciate how you might. Maybe the only fear that you have is obviously not hitting the thing that you set yourself out, and then you have like a really horrible relationship with yourself. But I struggle to connect with that myself. But
yeah, like I can understand the points that he's raised here. So the idea of taking on more responsibility, maybe you're not that kind of person. And maybe it means like, if you go down this road, then you have to take on other things. But I think, for instance, like the choosing between advancement and friends, it sounds very kind of like, in what reality do we actually live in? Like I can understand that for schools, when your social reputation is like on the line and, you choose your module, you choose your class based on what friends are in there. But in real world, like, would you really turn down a promotion because you're not going to sit with Kathy near the coffee table anymore because you got your own office? I don't think so. So yeah, I wasn't like completely bowled over, but maybe that's just, I'm not someone like you said, who has a fear of success, but maybe that makes me narcissistic. I don't know.
No, it's the same with me. I don't really, it's not really something that stops or prevents procrastination behavior. If anything, I'd say it's more like I said before, it's the too many things, too many potential things I could be doing. It's quite distracting, etc. like that. So
I wonder if it, like, I'm trying to relate it to shattered assumptions, the idea of like, self-worth, because if you think that it's like an imposter syndrome, right? Like you don't think you're worthy of it. And maybe you have grown up and it's similar. There's another family pattern where you don't think you're worthy of a lot of the things that you do. And so maybe that's why a lot of people have fear of success, because they don't think they deserve it. Or
that's understandable, to be fair.
Yeah.
But once again, it is understandable. It's just not something that like immediately spoke to me in the book. Like it's one of the things I would say I would disagree with, but that's only because I haven't been in a position. But I'm sure, like, for example, he must have worked with people who are like this, who, this is how he sort of diagnosed them, right? I guess is kind of the point of it.
No, exactly.
Then the next stage is, should we move on to how we procrastinate?
Yeah, let's do it.
So how we procrastinate. once you have identified the specific negative behaviors, you can use their trigger to redirect your energy towards your goals. By assigning a level of importance to your task, you can see when you're making progress on what's really important. Assigning an A, most important, B, important, and C, least important, could be a good way of installing the systems. If you have too many urgent tasks, it indicates poor time management. Yeah, that's definitely something.
Yeah. I kind of like introduced some of this into my Notion, to be fair.
Yeah, did you?
It's basically just a priority list. But yeah, if you have too many, like I try to do the must-dos, right? I probably should change the language known after reading this book, but I changed. If I have too many reds, then I can basically see that I have poor time management. Or I try to do a certain like ratio, so maybe 2 red, 3 yellow, and a bunch of greens. But I need to get those reds done. It's just an easy thing to implement if you have any kind of system that tracks your tasks.
I get that. I get the whole sort of like adding sort of urgency to tasks. I quite like this idea as well, which is the procrastination log. So keeping a procrastination log, so you use it to try and identify the reasons for avoiding an activity.
Yeah,
this could be a specific thought, justification, attempted solution, or resultant thought. The idea is to note down any underlying negative attitudes and beliefs that lead to feelings of victimhood, deprivation, pressure to be perfect, or fear of failure. But yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. This tool, and it's probably one of the most actionable things you could, anybody listening can do off the back of this. It's create a procrastination log. So anytime you procrastinate, it's basically writing down what were you doing, what were you trying to do. So what's the task that you were going to do, and then what did you do to procrastinate, and maybe what was your thought process around that. So like, was it like, how were you thinking about the task? Like, why were you not doing the task? Was it because you're scared of the fear of failure, for example, like we're speaking about and stuff like that, or is it because you got too many things on your plate?
No, I introduced this on my Notion as well. So I should probably expand on it if I am procrastinating. I still need to introduce that. But yeah, I basically had a bunch of like tags. So whether I did it because I didn't do it because I prioritized fun, because it's not planned, I dislike it, it's boring, perfectionism, overwhelmed, or it's like a long task. Those things, it makes you, if you can already see that that's kind of tagged with that task, then it's like, okay, well, let me get up the ways to deal with this. If it is about perfectionism, let me get up the fact that I need to connect my self-worth with my work.
But that's exactly it. That's the point. It's like diagnosing yourself, isn't it? And then providing the solutions within the same framework to help yourself come up with a plan of how to deal with it. Yeah. What's next?
So,
do you want to have the next stuff?
Yeah, the next one is so ironically, on a psychological level, you are often the one who raises the stakes, changing straightforward tasks into a test of your worth. And there was a good metaphor, I didn't put it in the notes, but there was a good metaphor about like a plank and walking a plank just on the ground. And it's a really simple task. But then when we procrastinate, what we do is we increase the stakes. So think about that plank now being lifted 100 feet into the air. And then we procrastinate further, and then there's and we wait until we're forced to do something, so that there's like a fire behind us, so we have to walk the plank. And all these things, it's like we could have just done the task when it was on the ground and it was just walking across a plank. It was easy. I just thought it was an interesting metaphor to apply.
I agree with
that. So we overcome procrastination only when the dread of something worse gets us. So like I just gave the example of the fire behind us. Procrastination and anxiety work in 5 stages. 1, you give a task or a goal the power to determine your worth and happiness. When a perfect performance is linked to the sole measure of your self-worth. 2, you use perfectionism to raise the stakes, for example, linking your performance to a task with your value as a human being. 3, you find yourself frozen with anxiety as your natural stress response produces adrenaline to deal with threats to your survival. The more issues you pile upon this task, the more serious the threat if an error occurs. 4, you then use procrastination to escape your dilemma, which brings the deadline closer, creating time pressure and a high level of anxiety. And number 5, you then use a real threat, such as a deadline, to release yourself from perfectionism and to act as a motivator. I did read that right, yeah.
No, you did really right. And then you said you got this next bit saying to overcome this, you need to have a plan B and a plan C, rather than being overly dependent and overly insistent on plan A as the only way to achieve and survive. Yeah. And I don't know whether you get onto it later in this in the notes, but there was this idea of basically coming up with a different place to start, or realizing that there's no perfect place to start. And I thought that was quite an interesting idea, because I feel like a lot of the time with like tasks, unless there is, I mean, obviously not all tasks have this, but most tasks, there isn't a specific place you can start. So you can kind of start anywhere with it.
Yeah. Even
if it's just like researching information of how to do the task, that's still technically taking part of doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I took that away as sort of as a big thing, which I've always kind of had it in my head as well when I think of tasks. Like, this is how you have to start, but the reality is there's so many different positions where you can begin, right?
Yeah.
And it's realizing that maybe some of them might be more attractive to you to start with than the others. Just start with that and then see how you get on.
Yeah. No, precisely. I think that is an important thing to take on board, just because it makes it a bit more approachable. And you want to try and make it easier to get in. Once again, it's like any habit, you want to make it as easy as possible to start. Because once you're in, then it's commitment and consistency, right? You're more invested, you're more likely to see it through. And the same thing with like any task. If you just find a point to start at, and like you said, there's multiple different places to start, then you're already doing kind of like the hardest part. And then you can start, getting into it and making a structure like we were talking about earlier on. Should we move on to the next bit?
Yep.
After
you lead the way. Okay, so how to talk to yourself. The self-talk of procrastinators often unconsciously suggests and reinforces the feelings of victimhood, stress, confusion, and resistance to authority. So, e.g., I should do it, but I don't want to. I have to do it because they're making me do it. So changing how you talk to yourself is a powerful tool for disengaging from procrastination patterns of hesitation and indecision. So when you use the have to statement, this communicates to your subconscious mind that you don't want to do it. People are making you do it against your will. You have to do it or else. It's kind of a no-win situation. So if I don't do it, I'll be punished. Or if I don't do it, I'll be going against myself. So when you engage in this self-talk, your brain must tackle two conflicting situations, providing the energy needed for the task and providing the energy to resist threats to the integrity of the self. That's quite interesting. And I wonder whether that's, how we talked about how when you're battling yourself to do something, you actually end up more tired. So that would make a lot of sense. So the former causes a stress response, while the latter causes a depressive response, which could also explain the tiredness of battling yourself day in, day out. So the self-talk of should creates the following negative self-critical comparisons as well. This should be different compares an ideal imagined state with a current negative reality. This should be done compares the finish point with a bad or negative starting point. I should be like him or her compares a person you envy or admire with a bad, inadequate self. Should be there compresses an imagined blissful future where you are now.
Yeah.
Just as the have tos will elicit stress, the shoulds will elicit depression. But it's quite easy to see, following this logic, how you would get yourself into those traps. Like, I have to do this, I should do this. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe. And then have tos and shoulds do not communicate to the mind and body a clear picture of what you choose to do, when you choose to do it, where you choose to do it, and how you can choose to do it.
Yeah.
So you have to challenge every I have to with a decision. You don't have to want to do the task, nor do you have to love it. But if you have to do it, you might as well make it as pleasant as possible. So I quite like that with the sort of, choosing. Maybe you find you don't like the task, but you can choose when you do it, so it's better. You can choose where you do it, so it's more attractive to you. Choose how you do it.
I guess it essentially gives you more power, doesn't it? It's like putting it in your hands. And I think that's something that I think reduces a lot of procrastinating, because a lot of time, someone is delegating you a task, but you can reframe it just through language to basically be like, look, I know I have to do this anyway, but I can do it on my terms. And that gives you a bit more stride, a bit more motivation, rather than like, resenting the authority and rebelling against it and putting it off until the last minute, and then acting in these self-destructive ways. I think, when we have a bit more control, once again, it's like humans, we're obsessed with control, and we hate other people controlling us. So if we can just a shift in language, make it feel like we're in more control, then we're much more likely to follow through with it, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then we've got here 5 ways to go from a procrastinator to a producer. So replace I have to with I choose to. Replace I must finish with when can I start. Replace this project is so big and important with I can take one small step. Replace I must be perfect with I can be perfectly human. I quite like that one. But that's also one of those justification techniques where you can be like, you can do anything, be like, I'm just
you only live once, mate.
Yeah, that's it. Replace I don't have time to play with I must take time to play. I think it's quite interesting. It's an interesting mindset shift. All of this, I have to finish it, but start thinking about that and think about where can you start. When can I start? Yeah, that's quite an interesting mindset shift as well.
It is, and I think it is quite important. Like realistically, it's not that big. Like here, we're just talking about changing 2 words. Obviously, keeping up with it and reminding yourself
the way you perceive, right? So, for example,
it's like a metaphor.
I have to do an essay. Where do I start with this essay? At least then it frames your thinking about where can I start. And then once you start thinking about where to start, you might actually start because you're consciously, or your mind is framing the task of where should I start. And then once you start thinking about it, you're probably going to find a place you can start. Whereas if you just think of, I have to do this, I should do this, blah blah blah. It is interesting. I want to get into the habit of that. Maybe like almost like a thing where it's like, if you're ever procrastinating, start asking these questions. It's like, when should I start? Where can I start? Yeah. And try and get yourself, what's the next action I should be taking? Like, what's the smallest thing I could do right now to start doing this? Yeah. Is it even just Googling the thing? Is it just literally putting the name in? And then start with that, see how far you get.
And I think also, like, when you do this shift, it gives you more freedom in regards to like what you're allowed to do with this task. So I think if you use have tos and should, then these stress and depressive kind of responses probably reduce your ability to think outside the scope, to think about like these other possibilities of like, where can I start? Because you're a bit anxious or you're depressed or anything like that.
Oh, for sure.
It definitely is going to be using up some of your cognitive energy.
I was going to say, you spend more time beating yourself up, being like, no, I get that. I think you spend more time just thinking, I should be doing this. Like, why am I not doing this? Why am I so shit? Like, why can't I find the motivation to do this? Your brain is focusing on those questions rather than where can I start? Yeah. It's like a more, it's more almost like a more, divergent thinking process. It's more like, what's the possibilities? Where, you start thinking a bit more creatively.
That's precisely what I was going to say. Like, to be creative, you need it'd be a bit more kind of relaxed, not in this state of anxiety. And so if you want those creative ideas, if you want to be able to indulge in divergent or convergent thinking, I think you do need to realistically get rid of those 2 kind of factors, such as have to and should. So that one I thought was particularly interesting, that chapter. On to the next one.
Yeah, go for it.
Lovely. So guilt-free play and quality work. So guilt-free play is based on the seeming paradox that in order to do productive, high-quality work on important projects, you must stop putting off living and engage wholeheartedly in recreation and relaxation. Being taught that work is unpleasant and that we are lazy leads us to believe that we need the pressures of have to and shoulds to keep us from escaping to play. I think that's quite an interesting one, isn't it? It's like really taps into how we're brought up as like children. And it makes sense, and it makes sense that like, teachers will probably engage in like, you have to do this or you should do this to try and get us into action, right? Because we are kids and we'll just act out and we need structure. But that's them trying to guide us rather than how we should perceive work. But it's our natural kind of association that because our teachers have told us to do that, that we'll then take that on board and approach work that way rather than being like, they're just trying to guide me, but I still have a choice here. I should choose.
I guess it's the classic, isn't it? It's from a state of authority, and you kind of like get conditioned to always listen to the state of authority, and like you know, it does really deeply ingrain into you, like, you should be doing this. You should be working. Like, you're at work, you should be working all the time.
Yeah.
You should be doing nothing else but working. Like, it's just like, wow, Jesus.
Exactly. And I tell you what, people also apply that to their like dreams or goals. And I used to believe in this because with acting, everyone says, you know, you should be doing it all the time, every day, all that kind of stuff. And obviously,
hustle mindset type thing. Like, you got to hustle, you got to day in, day out. If you're not sending 10 million self tapes a year, you're not going to get it.
That's literally the attitude. And so a lot of people burn out because they're told that they have to do this all the time. And obviously, to do
exactly.
There's no example is like a lot of luck.
Yeah, of course, maximizing chances for luck, but at the same time, you've got to call your yeah.
But also by engaging in other kind of like areas of life, you get to take some of those and apply it elsewhere. And as we'll see I think there's a couple of points on this idea that like guilt-free play, like, you know, when you play, you also extract some of those things and apply it to work, right? It's like you might go out with your mates and you'll be talking to them about your work, and then they pitch in an idea. And then you're like, oh God, I didn't think of that, right? It's like a basic example, but the idea is that, you know, sometimes going and dipping your toe into different areas of life can actually help you in your work or whatever you're
doing. Yeah, for sure.
So when attempting to motivate yourself to start working on a goal, you should use attraction rather than threats to pull you towards your goal. Punishing tactics often create a paralyzing rather than motivating effect. That's pretty straightforward, I would say. Like, you know, you are trying to motivate yourself after all. However, I would say, I can't remember what book it was. We read it recently. It was something to do with how they incentivized boys to stop playing with certain toys. But basically this idea that if you're trying to incentivize yourself, don't like use money or something like that, because then you associate just doing it just for money rather than...
that's a good point. That is true about the money. But I think that when you're talking about, is it not the one
Maybe
where
that's a different bit,
they was telling kids to not use a toy? So basically, instead of saying don't use that toy,
it was like different.
It was like, don't use that toy because it's a bad thing to do, and then they internalized it as a bad thing to do rather than I'm gonna get beaten. So it became more part of their like identity. Like, it was their choice. Like, it's a bad thing to do, and then it became a question of like good or bad. I'm choosing here rather than don't do that. Whereas like, I don't have a choice. He's making me not choose it.
So it does,
and they found that more kids conform to it. Yeah. I think I'm pretty sure that was the one.
Yeah, no, you're right. I can't. It was one of the communication books.
I want to say it could even been influence.
I think it was actually.
I think it could have been influence. Yeah. On the authority chapter, I think, possibly.
I think you're right. The pull method recognizes that distant and indefinite rewards, so like a promotion after 4 years, don't motivate as much as more immediate and definite rewards, such as leisure or seeing friends, etc. That's once again pretty straightforward, just in terms of like, you know, pain and pleasure, reward. Pretty much anything to do with habits. So to control your work habits, you must make your periods of work shorter and less painful, and the rewards more frequent and immediate, so more pleasurable, interlacing short periods of work with breaks and rewards. By scheduling guilt-free play first, it gives you a sense of freedom about your life, as you know when you can settle into short periods of focused quality work. It gives clarity on when you should work. The vitality of play can carry over to your work. So yeah, kind of what we were talking about, or what we touched on earlier, this idea when we were saying that, what was it, scheduling fun.
Yeah.
Once you have that, you know, you don't have that guilt overlooming you when you're working, because you know you've already got that out of the way in a sense.
And then also the whole point is giving that sort of immediate reward, that feeling like, I've done the work, I'm now getting a reward of play. It kind of uses meant to sort of condition you as well too. Not even just condition you, but also I guess at the same time actually take time off, because I feel like some people just spend their whole day just beating themselves up, not even having any time for fun, let alone not even achieving anything. They just procrastinate and then don't do anything, and then also not have fun.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So.
And I find that my schedule changes when I have like some coursework to do, because it's like, oh no, I need, you know, I put it off. I don't have that much time now, so now I can't do the things I want to do. And then I'll sit down and start doing my coursework and feel shit that I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do, or I didn't get around to the things I wanted to do. So this way, you kind of get the best of both.
Yeah. So we've got overcoming blocks to action. So when procrastination is your sole defense against something you fear, it becomes a difficult habit to unlearn. However, there are alternative ways of coping with it. The three major fears that block action and create procrastination are the terror of being overwhelmed, the fear of failure, and the fear of not finishing. There's three corresponding now habit tools. So we've got tool 1, which is 3-dimensional thinking and the reverse calendar. So this normal level anxiety will remain overwhelming if you insist on knowing the right place to start. Instead, realize there are several adequate starting points. This is kind of what you're talking about earlier. This is step 1. Number 2 is have not permitted yourself enough time along the course of your project for learning, building confidence with each step and asking for help. Number 3, critical the fact that you're only starting. Each achievement is diminished by being compared with the imagined ideal. But yeah, this is the additional points added to obviously starting wherever. But yes, we do have this idea that, we don't like the fact that obviously if you're taking small incremental steps, you're still not near the finished part. I mean, we could say the same with with the Wise Words Notion stuff. Like, there's an imagined ideal we have which we want to get to, which is obviously a long way in the future. But at the end of the day, it's the small steps that get you there anyway, and it's trying not to get disheartened that even a small step is still an incremental. It's an incremental point towards the final end goal, right? And it's realizing that it in itself is technically some form of success because you've actually taken a step forward towards the end.
Absolutely. And touching on the second point that you said, permitting yourself time along the course to kind of to account for learning. What we were talking about earlier on, when it's vague, you've never done it before, you don't have any structure yet. I think this is a big one because you do need to realize, okay, let me just go through it once, or even just skim read, or put a basic structure in for my essay, just so that then I can I have a place.
Or let's just scope out this task. Let's just scope it out. I'm not even going to start the task. I'm just going to scope it out and figure out what needs to be done. And that part there was the 3-dimensional thinking as a tool. It's several adequate starting points. Spend some time learning, learning what you need to do, etc. And then realizing that, even any step of progression is still an achievement in itself. And even if it doesn't feel like it compared to the ideal state, you're still making these steps, and therefore it's worth sort of celebrating, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we've got here the reverse calendar. So breaking down a goal into next tasks so that it's approachable and gives clarity. Then assigning these tasks from the main deadline back into the present day. So it's just planning. Yeah. He created his own new tool called planning, but called it reverse calendar, which is take your massive project and break it down into steps from the end to the start, which is pretty much planning. But it's okay. We're gonna breeze past that. But the point is, and this is kind of what the other point of the 3-dimensional thinking of the sort of learning, scoping out the task is quite an important thing to do, because at least once you've scoped it out, what the steps are for actually getting to that ideal state. And it's obviously a lot more motivating when you can start crossing out the steps. There's 10 steps here. I've done 3 of them. I'm there. I'm not nearly there, but I'm on my way.
No, exactly. So tool 2.
Yeah. Should we go ahead?
Yeah. So, hey guys, unfortunately we had a bit of a technical issue, but basically what was said, that was to face your fears and create safety. Ask yourself these 6 questions. 1, what is the worst that could happen? 2, what would I do if the worst really happened? And then what would I do? 3, how would I lessen the pain and get on with as much happiness as possible if the worst did occur? Number 4, what alternatives would I have? What would I have to do to increase the alternatives that are acceptable to me? Number 5, what can I do now to lessen the probability of this dreaded event occurring? And number 6, is there anything I can do now to increase my chance of achieving my goal? So basically all of that is kind of just creating a safety net. It's thinking into the future, being sensible and being like, well, okay, let's say I don't get this done in time. What are the consequences? How would I deal with those consequences? What's my plan if this does actually happen? And that kind of just it gets rid of the fear and the anxiety a bit so that you're a bit more prepared.
For sure. And then we've got tool number 3. So I quite like this one, persistent starting. It takes work to procrastinate. That's also quite an interesting insight in itself. So it takes work to procrastinate, and it takes work to face your fear of finishing. So why not tackle the work that's going to reap the most long-range benefits? So prepare challenges to negative statements and attitudes. So I need to do more preparation before I can start. So be alert to when preparation becomes procrastination.
They're similar to the loopholes that we were talking about in what's it called? What was the one last week? The habit blueprint. Just this idea, once again, it's like being prepared. So when we do have these kind of like negative statements or attitudes towards a task, and we start falling back to these like, I need to do more preparation, or at this rate I'll never finish. It's like, well, I already have a solution if I start to think like that, right? And if you have those at hand and you're aware of, you're self-aware of what you're thinking, then you can just, use those and get around it and be like, well, let me break this down. Actually, I do have time. Actually, I can start wherever I want. It's not working. Well, then I can come up with a creative way of getting around it. All these ways just give a bit more, lessen the fear. That's essentially what it's doing.
Makes sense.
Okay, so next bit.
Yes, you lead.
Okay, so the unschedule. Now, the unschedule is a system that helps to change the way you perceive work by integrating the guilt-free play concept into a system. The idea is to invert how we normally schedule our time. Instead of scheduling work, you schedule your fun activities and things that contribute to your life outside of work. And then you try to fit in small bouts of work around them, which is unscheduled work. You are essentially removing the option of resorting to fun activity to procrastinate off the table. So when you are in a period of non-scheduled time, it's time to work. Without a record of your legitimate commitments to leisure, you're more apt to feel guilty about lost time, or to feel depressed when you see blank spaces on your schedule and can't remember how you spent the time. And I think I'm guilty of that. Like, I have a lot of like blank space on my calendar, and I just don't know where it's gone. And it's like 3 hours, and I'm like, what the fuck did I do in that time? Even like small things, just like 15 minutes worth of doing something, it all adds up at the end of the day. The unscheduled builds your confidence in 2 ways. First, it gives you immediate and frequent rewards following short periods of work, rather than delaying a sense of accomplishment until the task is completed. So rewarding you by, having a leisure activity after you're going to be working. And the second is the habit of recording each period of work gives you a visible reward that allows you to see how much concentrated, uninterrupted work you have completed each day and each week. And we talked about this with, I think it was last week, with the habit blueprint, this idea of making your progress visible. It's really important, because otherwise it's very abstract and it's just a feeling. We're just going off a feeling otherwise, like we're either progressing or we're not. But if we have something to actually show our progress, then it's more motivating at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Some of the rules to start with include: do not work more than 20 hours a week on this project. Do not work more than 5 hours a day on this project. You must exercise, play, or dance for at least 1 hour a day. You must take at least 1 day a week off from any work. Aim for starting on 30 minutes of quality work. Work for an imperfect, perfectly human first effort, and start small. And I remember reading this bit because he gave an example of someone who he sent away to work to use this kind of unscheduled program. And it was quite interesting because you're limited, which is an interesting concept, because you're like, okay, let's see, I'm going to fit in my fun stuff, and then I'm going to work around it, right? And you're only supposed to work a certain amount a day. But actually, let's say you do get in your work, you do get in your fun activities, and then you get in more work, and it's almost becomes a competition. Once again, it's like reframing it. So this guy went away and he was like, oh, I was able to get in 25 hours this week. You can't stop me. And it was just an interesting concept of reframing, it as a goal to try and do your fun activities as well as getting in a lot of work. I thought that was just an interesting point.
I quite like it because it definitely changes the focus, because obviously we always think about trying to stuff as much work into a day as possible, where this is more like how much fun can you stuff into one day. It's just different. Exactly. I mean, realistically, in the most ideal world, if you literally could design a life that you'd want to live, you would literally want to put as much fun as possible into your life. So why are we not fucking doing that? Like, to me, it's kind of like, it makes it's annoying that we've even got being like culturally indoctrinated to the point where none of us even consider that life should be enjoyed. It's like life should be worked hard. It's like, no, you should enjoy stuff, but also work hard. It's like you can do both. It's not like they're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. I find it's just interesting. Like I remember reading it and I was like, oh wow, I've actually never thought about it like that. Like obviously, you want to enjoy life and get in as much, but I hadn't thought about it in that kind of systematic way of like introducing scheduled fun. So the unscheduled builds up a subconscious desire to work more and play less. It reframes work from a chore to a challenge. Instead of thinking you don't have enough time, it creates a dynamic where you try to find time around the things you have already scheduled in. So exactly.
I really like that. Actually. The more I think about it, like I could schedule in, like I'm reading here, this is when I'm doing my habits, this is when I'm doing the gym, this is when I'm doing this. Work just fits around that, and that's like my template. My template is based off the things I want to do.
Exactly.
I'm doing the things I want to do, and that's like that's set. I'm having this fun, and then the work is going to fill in the cracks around it, and it's going to be the challenge to finish all that work. Time that I can. Okay, I like that. Yeah. And
then it's like because it's a challenge, it has that element of competition, which has that element of motivation. So it all kind of like it completely changes it. The dynamic of approaching work, which I think was quite interesting. So to do this unschedule, basically schedule only previously committed times such as meals, sleep, meetings, free time, recreation, leisure reading, socializing, lunches and dinners with friends, health activities such as swimming, running, tennis, etc., and routine structured events such as commuting time, classes, medical appointments, everything like that. And then you fill in your unschedule with work on projects only after you have completed at least 1/2 hour. And I think that is quite key that he tries to get at, is that this half hour is like, you have to do that first before you then schedule in anything else. Then take credit only for periods of work that represent at least 30 minutes of uninterrupted work. So the only way you can really reward yourself or see that you're visually progressing is by, you have to work more than 30 minutes. So there's another kind of challenge element in there. Number 4, so reward yourself with a break or a change to a more enjoyable task after each period work. Number 5, keep track of the number of quality hours worked each day and each week. So you could probably introduce an element of like that token economy that we were talking about last week with the habit blueprint. Can you? This idea of seeing it stacked up, and you have a token for every time you complete 30 minutes, and then at the end of the week you can exchange that for rewards. That would probably be a good way. Number 6, always leave at least one full day a week for recreation and any small chores you wish to take care of. Number 7, before deciding to go to recreational activity or social commitment, take time out for just 30 minutes of work on your project. And the sub-points here. So this uses your attraction to the pleasurable activity to get you started more often. It allows you to enjoy the leisure activity without guilt, and it starts your subconscious mind working on the project while you play. That's an interesting idea. So like we were talking about earlier on, like drawing parallels or like bringing bits from play, and the diffuse mode that Barbara Oakley talks about, working while you're playing. So you might come up with new ideas or something. And then focus on starting, think small, keep starting. And last one, never end down. So this is never stop work when you're blocked or at the end of a section. Stick with something and then quit when you're just starting to make ground. This energy will propel you to this will propel you next time you start up. And I thought that was an interesting point. I've never come across that before.
No, it was an interesting point. I don't know if I 100% agree with it, because I've always thought if I'm in like the zone, I want to continue. But it's fair enough. I do kind of get what he's saying. Don't end on like a sort of, especially, I guess another way of putting it is like, I've heard, what was it? There was a different way. Somebody said before, like for writing specifically, it was like never finish the last sentence. So always have your sentence like half done with the end. So when you first sit down the next day, you complete the sentence and your momentum's back. So I kind of get the reason for it, but at the same time, I'm not going to be willing to, like, if I've just started getting going, I've just got into flow, I'm going to be right. That's it. I'm in flow. Task over. Let's go play. Like, that's not going to bring me straight back to play the next time. But I kind of get what he's saying. He's like, use the energy that you have to, like, don't finish at a dead end where you think, oh, there's nothing else I can do. It's like finish where there's still stuff to be done, so you're still in that sort of momentum.
Yeah, and I wonder if, like, you could really, like, it sounds like an interesting concept, but I wonder whether you can actually just suddenly elicit that mood again, like right off the bat. You know, I'm a bit skeptical to know whether, because like you might be in a motivated mood, and then the idea tomorrow when you pick it back up doesn't have the same weight. I don't know. And then last bit, so using the Unschedule provides 5 major benefits. So number 1, realistic timekeeping, so you become acutely aware of how much time is really left for working on your stated goals. Number 2, 30 minutes of quality time. So by starting small, you will have more opportunities during the day to chip away at the big. 3, experiencing success. By doing smaller sessions, you will experience success more often. Sound like a tongue twister, that one. Number 4, self-imposed deadlines. And number 5, newfound free time. So when one of your leisure activities is cancelled, you can suddenly find yourself thinking with relief, I have free time, I can work. That's an interesting, I don't think I've ever done that, but yeah.
Imagine the day when I finally get to that point. It's like, wow, yes, I've got some free time. Let's work. Let's go.
I do find it with like certain hobbies, but like, when I'm, I can't say that would like.
I guess you could define hobby as work to a degree, right? It just depends how you define work. If you're doing something, technically you're doing work in some form capacity. But anyway,
it's interesting though, this Unschedule thing, because what if you have multiple things that you regard as leisure? Do you try and fit them all in?
I think you factor it all in, to be honest. I reckon.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to think what I would put as leisure. I don't know. I mean, obviously you've got some very obvious ones there. He was mentioning, so like sort of gym schedule, leisure reading. But then I guess like you said, dinner, like lunch dates or whatever. If you're going to meet people, you've got sport as well. I don't know. I'm gonna play around with it.
Yeah.
But yes, so next we've got fine-tuning your process, so you can strengthen your ability to switch more readily from your old pattern to the new by planning a controlled setback to rehearse your reactions. So to do this, you choose a project on which you are likely to procrastinate. You notice the warning signs of procrastination associated with this project. So this goes back to sort of what we were saying earlier with the creating a sort of procrastination log. So working out what tasks you procrastinate on and which way you procrastinate. So then you're going to consciously choose to procrastinate for a few hours to observe the self-statements that lead to guilt and self-criticism. So you're going to sit there in like wallowing in self-pity and guilt and, sort of why am I not good enough, etc. And document how you're feeling and notice how this process of self-criticism leads to that feeling of guilt and depression and resentment. So by consciously procrastinating, you become aware of the downsides of it and therefore apparently less likely to let us do it the next time. But this whole point here is you're kind of there being aware of all the things, the self-talk you're saying to yourself, and then you can probably put it, I mean, it's probably best to document it, and then you can sort of tear it apart, right? You can literally look at it and be like, okay, well, how much of this is actually true?
Yeah.
And then I guess the more you do that, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're like, I'm just chatting shit to myself here. Like this is, I'm now aware of the patterns of, self-talk. And this, this isn't true.
It's an interesting idea, I think. It's kind of like wallowing in it, like you said, like really taking in the like negative aspects of it. Because like what we said with like habits, right? So if you want to be more motivated to do it, then read up on the good stuff, right? If you want to cut a habit, then read up on the bad stuff. This is basically just like experiencing the bad stuff, being conscious of the bad stuff that is occurring when you procrastinate. It's like self-negative talk.
Yes, well, it's becoming aware of it. Like we said, the whole point of this is just to realize what you're actually saying to yourself, so you can actually combat it. Because like we said before, a lot of this procrastination is all to do with feeling a sense of shame and guilt related to the self-talk. That's literally kind of it. That's what makes it worse. Like we don't do a task, we criticize ourselves. How do we criticize ourselves? Once you figure that out, you can be like, okay, well, let's come up with ways to like actually combat that self-talk and maybe motivate us, etc.
That's good point.
I'm going to go straight on here to sort of about distractions.
Go ahead.
So there are at least 5 types of distractions. I thought these were quite interesting, quite a good little bucket. So one type of distraction is strong emotions. So this distraction deserve your immediate attention. You may be using work as an attempt to distract yourself from facing strong emotions. Another type of distraction is warnings of danger. So a real or imagined threat will interrupt your ability to concentrate by stimulating an adrenaline reaction. Remove threats and do the work. Thank you. Yes, I will. Number 3, to-do reminders. If you didn't already use a list, to jot them down. So that one I took as well as a lot of like something pops into your mind like, oh, I should have done that. I'll have to do that today. The whole point here to combat that is you just jot it down, but we can go on to that in a second. Number 4, escape fantasies. So if you anticipate long periods of deprivation, you can expect an increase in fantasies about food, sex, and vacations. Record your escape fantasies to plan your future guilt-free play. And then number 5 is UFOs, so unidentified flights of originality. Look at this guy. Quickly write them down so you can consider them later if you wish. So that's like just like an idea, etc. And I do think this is quite a useful, bunch of buckets to contain like the majority of reasons people like get distracted. I would say to-do reminders almost encapsulate anything you've even would like to do. So something comes into your head like, I should go to the gym. It's like, okay, well, I'll write that down. And that's where I think one of his better points was the distraction pad. I love the idea of just having a piece of paper or something next to you, which is like, if something pops into your mind, write it down immediately. It's gone. It's there. It's captured. It's done. And I thought that was one of his most useful ones. Do you want to move on to the what's next?
The following steps will help you maintain the motivation necessary to set and complete your goals. So number 1, recognize the work of procrastinating. So let go of the fantasy that you can escape work by procrastinating. That's very straightforward. Number 2, freely choose the entire goal. So state your goal in the form of a choice or decision. So I freely choose to work on. This gives you more control over the goal experience. And number 3, create functional, observable goals. So vague goals must be translated into something tangible you can do, actionable steps. So basically a lot of what we've talked about so far, but just applying it to a goal rather than to like a task or like a project. Still maintaining those, like, because goals obviously, I would say goals are quite large in comparison. And so they do have the tendency to be quite vague. And I think it's especially important to try and break them down, put them into like next tasks, next to-dos. It just gives it structure and everything like that. Okay, so the next section is the procrastinator in your life. So I think I only had a few points for this, but basically it was just applying the same procrastination like tools to like teaching people or guiding people.
Yeah, I took the least out of this. He started talking about how to manage procrastinators as well, wasn't it? It's like how you should talk to procrastinators, and it was less about like, it was more about empowering them to make their own choices and decisions rather than forcing people to do stuff. It was very much like, in logical relationship with all the other lessons he was teaching in the book.
Exactly. Yeah.
Should we move on to the actionable steps?
Well, the actionable steps, there are loads of them because we've just been over all of them.
Yes.
So should we just go over the ones that we think were the most beneficial to us? And then obviously for any of you that are listening, the list, like you said, Jess, earlier on, is on the book summary on our website at wisewords.blog, and you can find them all there. There are quite a lot to this one, but then kind of like encapsulated, because like one thing will have like 5 sub things, 5 sub steps. So do you want to just go over the ones that you found the most impactful, or?
Yeah, so I think the languaging stuff we were talking about earlier, but I think for me, it's more the awareness before even the rest of it. It's just being aware and keeping a procrastination log. So trying to diagnose yourself with the types of procrastination that you undertake, or the reasons why you undertake procrastination. I think that if there's anything you can do from this book, that is the most impactful thing you can do, is kind of like becoming more aware of your procrastination patterns, why you do it, when it's being done, what are you saying to yourself? What are you saying to yourself after you procrastinate? Are you, making yourself feel more guilty, etc.? And then obviously once you know these things, you can then start with the sort of more positive self-talk. So, if you're somebody who has a problem with like a task is too overwhelming, you can start asking yourself questions like, where should I start? Where can I start? And it just little tips and tricks like that. I think that was, for me, I think if anybody's get the most bang for their buck, they should focus on that, becoming more aware and then applying the right things to their own personal situation, right? Because everybody's different, as we've discovered through this. We're all a mix of different procrastination styles, depending upon the activity it is. Like the thing this book's made me realize is there's multiple ways that I procrastinate, and they're for different reasons, and therefore you can't attack the same one, or you can't attack them all in the same way. You need a different strategy for each one. So if you're going to do anything, you have to do that first.
Yeah, no, I think those some wise words, mate. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, at the end of the day, like, habits are beneath the surface of conscious awareness. The only way that you're going to change them is by paying attention, becoming self-aware, and in regard to procrastination, basically just being aware that, well, if I'm about to do a task, what's my attitude to that task, right? Am I, what's my feeling about it? Because like you said, once you know that, then you can start to diagnose it and come up with a solution that is appropriate, because you can't use that solution for all of them. And I think that's, particularly important. And whether that means reframing it, I quite liked that kind of like surfaced a number of times in this book, the idea of like, just a slight change in how you approach it or how you talk to yourself can reframe it and give you like a lot of choice and control and freedom. I think those things were quite important because it just allows you to feel like you can do what you want to do rather than someone inflicting it upon you or there being any kind of like external demands. That's probably what I took away from it the most.
Yeah, and then I guess the only other things I would add is the sort of neat little tips and tricks you can do, such as the unschedule, so where you schedule in all your fun and then you basically do your work around it, as well as I quite like the idea of the 30 minutes uninterrupted work is like the first primary goal of your day, and if you do that, that's a success. I quite like that idea.
Yeah.
I also really did enjoy the ideas around just starting and realizing that a lot of the time you can start with the thing you enjoy the most as well. So like if there's multiple entry points to the task, just start with the one you enjoy the most. At least then you got some momentum. I thought that was quite useful. I'm trying to think what else I've got. What else catches my eye from looking at this? We've done the reverse. Did we do the reverse calendar? No, reverse calendar was just planning. And to be honest, I do actually think it is. I think the most, if I was going to say one thing, it's go to the very beginning of this podcast, re-listen to the 6 warning signs to look out for. The book summary will be on the website, and go through, answer those questions, figure out what it is exactly and why you're procrastinating. Once you've done that, everything will become much, much easier to deal with, because we can't advise on what your situation is. You have to find it out for yourself and figure it out. So,
Yeah, so we hope you enjoyed that. Next week, I think we're going to be doing elastic habits. Is that right?
I think so. Elastic habits, and then
lovely
more habits or something like that. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And like you said, Jess, head on over to our website, wisewords.blog, where all the book summaries will be waiting for you. Until next time, guys.
Cheers.
Hey guys, well there you have it. We hope you enjoyed that book summary. Now we know it can be a lot to take in all at once, so if you want to be able to read this in a more palatable size, or you want to be able to implement any of those key actionable ideas that we were talking about in this episode, head on over to our website at wisewords.blog, where the book summary will be waiting for you. Also, don't forget to check out our socials, as we consistently upload the key ideas, benefits, and actionable ideas from all the books that we read. The links to those will be in the description below. Now, we want to be able to get you the best content in a way that's really easy to understand, but we need your help. Your opinion matters. So you are our feedback mechanism. And with those quick actions, whether that's leaving us a like or a dislike, commenting in the comment section below, or subscribing to our channel, all of those help us gauge what we're doing well and how to improve on our method of delivery. So if you have any thoughts on the matter, don't hesitate to act. It takes less than 10 seconds and it really helps us out. But with all that being said, until next time, stay wise.